The hammer hit my thumb before it hit the nail, and that set the tone for the rest of the day. I stood on a ladder that had no business holding a man's weight, pressing a split board against the barn wall with one hand and swinging with the other, and I managed to bend 3 nails sideways before the fourth found wood. The board hung crooked. I climbed down and looked at it from the ground, hoping distance might improve the situation, but it did not. It hung there like a drunk leaning on a door frame, and I thought about pulling it off and starting again, but my thumb was already swelling purple and the morning was half gone. The barn roof had been leaking since before I arrived, maybe longer. Water stains ran down the interior walls in long brown tongues, and the hay in the loft smelled of mildew and neglect. I had found a stack of cedar shingles behind the barn, cracked and sun-bleached, but still usable, and I had told myself that replacing a few shingles was the kind of work any man could do. That was yesterday's optimism. Today's reality involved a great deal of climbing and swearing and very little actual repair. By noon, I had patched 2 sections of the roof badly enough that they might hold through light rain and would certainly fail in anything heavier. My hands were raw from the unfamiliar grip of tools, and the new gloves I had bought in Billings were already splitting at the seams. Back east, I had thought those gloves made me look prepared. Out here, they were a confession. The cattle were worse than the barn. There were 23 head on the Hale property, according to the count my father had given me in one of his rare stretches of speech. I found 19 that first morning, scattered across the west pasture like they had deliberately spread themselves as far apart as possible to make my life harder. The other 4 were somewhere in the brush along the creek, or possibly in the next county. I did not know enough about cattle to guess which was more likely. I rode the fence line looking for breaks and found 2, both on the south end where the posts had gone soft with rot. The wire sagged between them like an old clothesline. I could see the Dawson property through the gaps, their pasture green and orderly, their fence posts standing straight. It was the kind of contrast that did not need commentary, but I provided some anyway, quietly, to myself, using words my professors back in Pennsylvania would not have approved of. My horse, a gray gelding named Reverend that my father had owned for years, tolerated me with the kind of patient disdain that suggested he remembered better riders. He did what I asked, mostly, but slowly, and with an air of doing me a great personal favor. When I tried to guide him through the brush along the creek to find the missing cattle, he stopped at the tree line and refused to go further, and I sat in the saddle for a long minute trying to decide if I had enough authority in my voice to convince a horse, and concluded that I did not. My father was on the porch when I came back, sitting in the same chair he had been in when I left that morning. He had a blanket across his knees despite the September warmth, and his hands rested on the arms of the chair the way a man rests his hands when he has decided not to use them anymore. Henry Hale had been a big man once. I could see it in the width of his shoulders and the size of his hands, the frame of a body that had done hard work for decades. But the flesh had gone thin over the bones, and his color was wrong, a grayish yellow that no amount of fresh air seemed to fix. His eyes were the only part of him that still moved with real force, pale blue and sharp, tracking me as I unsaddled Reverend and led him to the water trough. He did not ask how the morning had gone. He did not need to. He had been watching from the porch, and the porch had a clear view of the barn, and the barn had a crooked board nailed to its side that told the whole story. I said I got most of the south fence marked for repair. My father nodded once, a slow dip of the chin that could have meant anything. I said, there are 4 head I could not find along the creek. He said, they will come back when they're hungry. His voice was dry and thin, like paper left in the sun too long, and those 7 words were the most he had spoken to me since breakfast. I wanted to ask him things. I wanted to ask if the barn had always leaked, or if that was recent. I wanted to ask about the feed situation for winter, about the well pump that groaned when I worked the handle, about 100 practical matters that a son should know about his father's land. But there was something in the set of his jaw that made questions feel like trespassing, and so I carried my saddle to the tack room and left him to his silence.
The house was full of closed doors. I do not mean that as a figure of speech, though it works well enough as one. I mean that the house my father had lived in alone for years had rooms that were shut and had been shut for a long time. The main floor held the kitchen, the sitting room, and my father's bedroom, and these showed signs of use, sparse and worn but lived in. The upstairs had 3 rooms, one of which I had taken for myself, the other 2 closed. One held old furniture draped in sheets and a window so dusty the light came through amber. The other was locked. I had noticed the locked door my first night and tried the handle without thinking, the way a person tries any closed door in a house they are learning. The knob turned halfway and stopped. I could see the keyhole, old brass, darkened with age. I did not ask my father about it because the house had already taught me that some questions were not welcome here, and a locked door in a quiet house is about as clear a message as a man can send without speaking. But the room I could enter, the one with the sheeted furniture, held something unexpected. Against the far wall stood a bookshelf, and the books on it were wrong. Not wrong for a house, but wrong for this house. Wrong for a rancher in a Montana valley who spoke 7 words a day and spent his nights staring at the dark. There was poetry, Tennyson and Keats, and a volume of Shelley with a cracked spine. There were novels, Dickens and Hawthorne. There was a Shakespeare, heavy and leather-bound, the kind a man might receive as a gift from someone who believed he would read it. I pulled the Shakespeare from the shelf and opened it, and a pressed wildflower fell from between the pages, dried flat and brown, but still holding its shape. Beneath it, on the title page, someone had written in a neat, slanting hand, "For Henry, who sees what others overlook." It was signed with a single letter, M. I stood there holding the book in a room full of dust and sheeted furniture, and I did not know what to make of it. My father was not a man who read poetry. My father was not a man who kept wildflowers. Whatever life had produced this shelf of books and this careful inscription, it was a life that had ended so completely I could not see its outline in the man downstairs. I put the book back and closed the door behind me.
Late in the afternoon, I walked to the eastern fence line to check the wire I had flagged that morning, and I saw Clara Dawson. She was in her own pasture, a quarter-mile off, working a horse through a gate. Even at that distance, I could see the ease of it, the way her body moved with the animal instead of against it, the lack of wasted motion. She had the reins in one hand and was latching the gate with the other, and the horse stood still beneath her, patient and calm, because the person on its back knew what she was doing, and the horse knew it too. I watched longer than I should have, not for any reason I could have named, not then, but because there is something hard to look away from in a person who belongs exactly where they are. She rode the way the mountains sat on the horizon, like the landscape had made room for her, and she had grown to fill it. I had been in Elkridge for 3 days, and I had not yet found a single thing I could do as well as Clara Dawson closed a gate. Reverend nudged my shoulder with his nose, impatient or hungry or simply tired of standing still for a man who was not going anywhere. I turned back toward the house. The sun was dropping behind the western ridge, throwing the valley into long purple shadow, and the air had that late September bite that warns you summer is done pretending. My father's lamp was already lit in the kitchen window, a small yellow square in the gray shape of the house. I thought about the locked room, and the books, and the letter M, and I thought about my father's silence, and I thought about the girl across the valley who made hard work look like breathing. I had come back to Elkridge because my father was dying and the ranch needed saving, and I had been here 3 days, and I had saved nothing, and I understood nothing, and the only nail I had driven straight all day was the one I hit with the wrong end of the hammer. But the mountains were still there, and the light on them was something no city had ever shown me, and when I walked inside, my father was still sitting at the table, waiting, though I did not know what he was waiting for. I hung my hat on the hook by the door and sat down across from him, and neither of us spoke, and that was the closest thing to a conversation we had managed yet.